Broad Street Review Podcast, Philly's online hub for arts, culture, and commentary, where art and ideas meet. I am your host, Darnell Radford. Today on the podcast, James Jackson enters the virtual space to talk with me about the first half of 2020. So here is my interview with James Jackson. We are via Skype, and I'm talking to James Jackson. So James, welcome.
Thank you.
To have you. The last 4 months have been pretty interesting for us.
Yeah. We're experiencing quite a revolution here in Philadelphia theater.
Yeah, there's a part of me that is like, I'm definitely have anxiety because so much of this stuff is coming to the forefront, but at the same time, a lot of this needs to be said, and I'm just wondering what the companies who, are arguably just kind of on the sidelines, trying to figure out their own companies as well while they're seeing all this going on. I wonder what they're thinking as well. But I started thinking about how, I didn't really have much to cover on Rep Radio or Broad Street Review because I normally cover a company who is producing work and trying to bring people to a space. But then I started thinking, I was like, well, what ends up being great about those conversations is the fact that I'm talking to an artist about their part in it. So I'm not actually talking about the companies anyway. So I figured I would find some people I know I have great conversations with.
Well, I love having conversations, so
yeah,
it's a good time to do that. My life has become going from. I was actually just talking to Terry Brennan yesterday, and we were noting how our life has become, instead of biking or driving from one theater across the city to another theater to have a meeting for an hour and then go to another meeting in an hour. It's now just become getting on Skype or Zoom or, whatever to get, and then forcing yourself off that meeting to get to the next meeting.
I know, it's like there's a lot of hard outs now. I've got a hard out at 30, so I can get to another remote meeting. So, how have you been keeping yourself busy over the last 4 months? I thought it would be kind of interesting to sort of look at all of those months and see what was going on for you then. So if we could, let's go back to March when the shutdown orders, came from high. What were you in the middle of, and what was your thought process from there?
So, interestingly, late April, early March, I was participating in Agitators, which is a whole story in and of itself. I actually, will publicly take the blame. It's the first show I've ever quit. I was the lighting and projection designer, and because I was doing 3 jobs, we just really never got it to the place where it needed to be to go to an audience. And so I quit. And then I had some gigs scheduled for my production company throughout March, and my first cancellation was March 10th because typically for productions that I do that are corporate events, they're a bunch of doctors. So I got all this information kind of early. And the doctors were all like, yeah, we were going to have that meeting in Princeton, but we're not. So it's canceled. So March 10th, like all my cancellations started. And after that, everything was canceled all the way out to at least September instantly. Like September was the earliest that anybody was talking about immediately.
I was ultimately following the news for Edinburgh Festival Fringe. I felt like if they were going to cancel, then everything between then and now was going to be canceled as well, and they did cancel as well.
Yeah.
So for me, we went to work from home mode, which we didn't have really a policy in place, but I am IT, so that was not hard for me to get together. It took a little, a week or two to kind of get our bearings there, and that's where we've been since then. But it's been kind of interesting because the only difference for me is that instead of leaving my home office to my corporate office, I am, in my home office, pretty much doing the same thing, but staying in the know with what's going on too. So, as the conversation started coming up, I was sitting right here with them all, just trying to process them. So that's March. We know that things are starting to ramp down. And I start thinking about how the flower show got lucky. I was thinking about the events that were able to happen and how it almost seemed like if this thing could just hold off until those things finish. I mean, they got lucky. They were on the end of, their show ended before all of this began. But then we get into April and we start to hear what a toll this is taking on the community and the city at large, where the city announces that the budget it had originally proposed, they're probably not going to be able to move forward with that, so they're making some changes. And then we hear about the cultural fund and the Office of Art, Culture, and Creative Economy is going to be defunded, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the community steps in.
So I'm always politically active, and I always have a somewhat open line of communication with several city council members, and I'm always drawing their attention to things that need to be paid attention to, and expressing myself to them, because while I'm an instigator and agitator myself, I realize that it would be impossible to do what you're elected to do as an elected representative unless you hear from people.
Yes. Yeah.
So as the mayor's budget was released and as he started talking, so I started every day watching the health briefing that the mayor's office and the Department of Health was doing at 11 a.m. So I started watching that every day and commenting on it, because there's a lot of folks who take half an idea and then get super worried about it. There were a lot of folks on there saying, oh, it's all fake. We should reopen right now. We're trying, this is just the city trying to take control over you, blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
It's such an
No.
elaborate ruse, you know, like why would they do that and why now? You know, I feel like there were more opportune moments to try to lie to an entire community, you know,
Yeah.
to
Well, I mean,
citizenry.
the past 300, 400 years has been an elaborate ruse, but
Yes.
it's not. Yeah, making you wear a mask to, protect public health is an elaborate ruse. We've done it before. We can do it again.
Yes.
Um,
And Philadelphia was at such an epicenter with I mean, not an epicenter, but like, you know, this hit Philadelphia specifically because of the pandemic of 1918,
mhm.
and I feel like definitely the cultural community was aware of that. You know, my day job was definitely aware of that and was thinking about that too. And I remember there was some. Uh, there was a talk of some big event that was going to happen, and they were saying like, are you not, do you not remember 1918? Like, we can't have that, we can't have that event, like, should, you know, come visit the museum and just take a walk through so we can remind you, you know, refresh your memory of like this thing we have not forgotten. um yeah.
It's amazing how little we learn of actual American history in school.
Hmm.
Like, it's also interesting the things that we concentrate on when we're talking about history. This idea of American exceptionalism was really, really hard, really concentrated on in my schooling. At least I was in school in the 80s and 90s, um, and so what I remember of my history and even my current events classes was more about American exceptionalism, why we were in Iraq, why we were trying to put the ideals of democracy all across the world. Um, and then, and I learned nothing about some of the things that I've learned since graduating high school and leaving college. Learned nothing about the move bombing. I learned nothing about very little about the civil rights movement. It was basically, Dr. King marched a little bit and we got the Civil Rights Act. Uh,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
learn nothing about the mistakes that we've made as a society over the years, and those are important to learn. Like, that's the part that of the quote that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think that's the part
Hmm.
of the quote that people who teach history don't learn from, is that you don't you have to teach the mistakes. You have to learn from your mistakes. You have to concentrate on those a little bit, even though they're embarrassing.
Yes, yes. And you can't just ignore them because they were embarrassing. You can't just say, um, uh, "Oh, that was a tough time," and then and just trail off. That was a tough time, and pretend not to speak of it. Oh, should we go now?
I
No,
mean, and it's happening
and
again,
unpack this.
is the frustrating part. I'm in this conversation on a fellow theater maker's Facebook thread about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter.
Hmm.
And there's a person on there arguing, oh, well, there's a right way to protest. There isn't. There isn't a right way to protest. And that's one of the mistakes of history that we never concentrate on, is that every time we try to limit protest to some certain type of protest, every time there is protest, we try and traffic cop it, and as a society, and try and make it something that is palatable to everyone. Um,
Yeah, we tone police it.
yeah.
We say, yeah, yeah, I understand I understand your concern and I hear that, but if you could just tone it down a little bit and try not to be as angry. We're finding this difficult to digest.
So I've been broadcasting a lot of like protest, like on the scene footage that I can find and stuff like that, and commenting on it. And that was one of the most, I want to say, aggravating parts of the South Philly
The
Olive
Marconi
Guardians. Yeah, the statements that they all made.
Olive Guardians.
They were like, you can't be out here protesting every day. We heard you. We get it. No, you don't get it. If you're saying we get it, then you just don't get it yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We so I was following the protests and I was concerned, but at the same time I was like, please be safe, everyone. Please be out there. Please make your voices heard, but please be safe. And I was, here in my bunker working, and it wasn't until we had decided to get out of, the routine we were in by going for a walk. We were going to walk to FDR, and because we're right here on Wharton, we were going to walk to FDR, and we walk up to Broad Street, and we caught a protest headed towards Snyder. So we said we would follow them. So we followed them on the sidewalk where everyone's wearing masks and fairly distancing, and then I just noticed how caring all the people were. Like, there were people handing out bottled water, they were handing out snacks and making sure everyone was hydrated. Like, they would take these stops reminding people to hydrate, and then they would start up again with the chants and whatnot, and then they got to Snyder and hung a left, and then we decided to join them. So we ended up going through the Passyunk area, I guess up 13th, and then ended up at City Hall. And that was the first time we had ever been out there with those protests that we had seen online, and it was a sight, to say the least. I didn't see anything about this that was a threat at all.
Right.
I said, I think, wherever they are observing this, they need to read these signs, they need to hear these chants, and all of these people are not out here, potentially risking their lives to be exposed to an invisible virus for no reason. It matters this much, and it always mattered. So but it's just even more now, because I remember, I think what really activated me was when I saw the post that the NFL had apologized. And while they didn't apologize to Colin Kaepernick, they just said we were wrong. And I posted something along the lines of, how many times have I said, why would I make this up? And then to see the thread of comments that came, after I posted that, everyone was sort of relating and commenting, and that's when I, became hyper focused on on all of this, as far as the protests were concerned, because following the deaths, I'm probably going to get the order wrong, but Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Elijah McClain. But Elijah McClain was earlier on, but that news came back later, now that all of this was sort of brought to light again. It was just like, when will this end? This has to stop. So I'm sitting there, and that's when all the statements come out. So now we go back into our community with the community who had the audacity to say we had no idea. Which,
The Philly theater community, you mean?
well, arts in general, I mean, but yes, specifically because of us, like to have this, like, we had no idea thought process is like,
I
well,
I know I've been saying it a lot, and I, I'm just going to say it again because I have been really frustrated about this, which is I've literally been saying these things since joining the Philadelphia theater community nearly 20 years ago.
yeah,
And I am not a person that backs down from saying these things. Like, you know, even though I've been blacklisted more times than I can think of, I've been called out, I've lost, you know, admin privileges over the theater Facebook group. You know,
yeah,
I have had literal campaigns to keep me from working in this community because of how outspoken I am.
hmm
And I just I don't get it. I don't get A, where people are haven't heard this before, haven't heard any of this before, or B, where people have the audacity to turn around and be like, oh, Black Lives Matter now that it's popular, but like 6 months ago they were deplatforming me, you know,
yes,
or people who have literally screamed in my face because something wasn't going the way that they wanted, exercising their full privilege to scream in my face because they were a director or an artistic director on a show. Um, and they still hold those positions and they still hold those jobs because of their white privilege, because they are white theater makers who can get away with that. Could you imagine if I screamed in somebody's face for like 20 minutes on a theater set? I would never work again.
yes. And after you were called difficult.
Right. No, I'm already called difficult. I've been called difficult so many times I can't even count.
All right, so if all black people are difficult, then we should just stop saying that, and we should just accept that we are all difficult.
Yeah.
If that's the case.
I think what it is artists are difficult and we
Yeah.
should accept that.
Yes, there are a lot of emotions. There's passion that comes in, and there's integrity too. I mean, so some of the conversations that I had is there are definitely levels in our theater community. And if, just to be generic about it, you could say that there are A, B, C, D levels, and they're based on, you know, resources, really. So you might have access to people, but you don't have access to money, or you might have access to money, and then you don't really tap into the community to do your work, or you might be local in name only, and those companies know exactly who they are. It's you know. So I remember saying two things to two separate organizations. One, I said, I have never had an issue with what you bring to the stage. I feel like you are talking about, you are starting or engaging in the conversations that need to be had. Um, these are diverse and inclusive roles. However, the makeup of your organization is still very white. So, what are you trying to say to us because you brought this production to the stage? You know, and I remember having a talk with a playwright who was in New York, who was in a interracial relationship, who had wrote a play that was about an interracial relationship and dynamic that was a makeup of the community that he was able to observe. And the press criticized him for even writing it because he was a white man. And I was like, so we had an interesting conversation about whether, you know, who has the right to tell these stories. But I think it's a little different when you look at the organization as a whole. You're sort of asking yourself, where did you get this from? Like, I'm not Italian, so I am not going to I'm not going to be overloaded with Italian culture. And there's going to be something specific that draws me to Italian culture. Um, if your organization has a specific lean, but most of them don't have a specific lean. The missions are generic at best, to kind of allow them to do whatever is, financially expedient at the moment. And it just makes, when you look back on all of that, what you've been able to see, what you and I have been able to see, is only a fraction of what is out there and what other people have been able to see as well. The other thing I had mentioned to another company was, after an interview, they had asked me. They said, "Oh, I forgot to mention how diverse this season is." Because every show just checked a box. And I said, well, maybe it's good if people just come and see the show and see the observe the season and then walk away saying, what a diverse and inclusive season. And maybe some of the feedback you get is, yes, more of this, because we were able to explore so many cultures in your season alone. We appreciate that, and we want more of that. But when you put that in a press release,
I think of it. I think Philly theater producers could learn some lessons from, like, I hate to throw it to a different medium, but Star Trek, and the production of Star Trek, which has always been anti-racist, and it was never sold as, oh, this show is going to be anti-racist. Even the most anti-racist season they had, or series they had, which was Deep Space Nine, wasn't sold as being diverse. It wasn't sold as, oh, this is the first black male lead of a sci-fi series on all of television in the U.S. It was just, this is a space station, and this is a story about a space station and the things that go on there. Don't use your wokeness as a marketing platform.
Yes. And we see it every February, and we see it in May, with the LGBTQ community, where it seems like late in the spring is when companies want to put a queer production on stage, or February just happens to elevate August Wilson. It's like, I could see Fences in November. I don't need to wait till February to see these pieces. And one thing I have noticed is that in the last probably 2 seasons or so, we've had artists like Cash Goins, who would bring something to the stage where he brings an entirely different audience, who is not a makeup of the theater community. And I would sit in those audiences saying, normally I'm waving at 4 to 5 people, but I'm looking at this audience, and this is a completely new audience, and that's exciting. Like, how did you bring them? Will they stay? Are they only here for you? But it was great. It was great to see that. I mean, if you really want to see work where it is actually inviting in a community, that was a shining example. I could think back years ago when Interact Theater Company did a production called the elaborate entrance of Chad Deity, and it was at Philly Shakespeare Festival, because the whole set was a boxing ring, and that the makeup of that audience was different too because of the content of the piece. And it's like, well, if you want to reach these audiences, it doesn't have to be a gimmick. It should just be a given. Like, you should just find this work, and it should just be a part of your thought process all the time.
Yeah, and theaters are, so there's this idea in theater that everyone's fighting for the same audience or fighting for the same money pot, and it's not true. First of all,
yeah.
I will say this time and time again, but I'm going to keep saying it so that hopefully it will sink in somebody's brain, some grant writer's brain, or all these funding seekers. The more money we bring into Philadelphia theater and diverse Philadelphia theater, the more gets produced, and the more that gets produced and the wider the audience, the more money will bring into Philadelphia theater. It's a self-feeding system. It's not about audience dollars, it's about providing such a cultural institution that it can't so that when budget arguments happen, because budget arguments are always going to happen, we can continue to point to the arts in Philadelphia and say, okay, you gave us $4 million last year, and that resulted in $4 billion of economic activity.
Mm-hmm.
So you literally collected, as a city, all of the money you gave us back in taxes. So you didn't actually really give out any money.
Yes, exactly.
You just loaned us some so that we could develop money for you, and that's why arts funding is important. And I've always jumped up and down on that. Like one of the reasons why I have, and a lot of my leftist friends question, and liberal friends question my constant working with the office of David O. Like, they kind of shame me for it, and they're like, is David O your buddy? Like, whatever, he's a Republican, he has bad positions. And yeah, sure, he's a human. He has bad positions on a lot of things. So do I. I'm human. I don't have all the answers, but one thing that the reason why I keep going back to his office, and the reason why I keep talking to him, is he listens. He's had more meetings with me personally than any city council member ever. And B, he understands economics. He understands the economic impact of the arts on Philadelphia. He's always been the arts council guy, and he literally, I barely have to even mention, look, we need to fund the arts because it brings money to Philadelphia, and he's already on it. He's already like, yeah, you're right. We're facing a $630 million shortfall on expected income this year. And that's probably shy of what the actual shortfall will be, because that was making some assumptions about things reopening.
Yeah.
So the reason we're facing that shortfall is because of tax income. So the projection by the tax office is that we're not going to receive that money in tax income. That's everything from people coming into the city and spending money on tickets and spending money on concessions and then staying in a hotel, and all the, Philly's Better When You Stay Overnight campaign, all of the tourism stuff that we do, that's one of the largest slices of tax income Philly has. And we're not going to have any of that this year. Then the second largest slice is all of the people who work in Philadelphia and pay taxes to work in Philadelphia. If you live outside the city, you pay taxes here, which is odd, I will admit, but we're not going to see any of those taxes this year. Everybody's working from home. So unless people live and work here, they're not going to be paying taxes here.
And I'm sure these businesses are trying to find every possible angle to pay as little as possible. You know, if my employees don't have to come to my building in Philadelphia, and you know, I have the metrics that a percentage of them don't even live in the city, then could they be exempt from, some taxes because they're not actually working in the city anymore? It is definitely a tough thing. It's also crazy to think about how easily we fell apart as a as a society, because we couldn't safely go outside.
Right.
And for a city that is not a stranger to a pandemic, how we were not prepared for this. Well, that was the part that was mind-blowing, but not in a way that like, oh, we just slept on it completely. Because I do, in defense of the organizations, I think everyone reacted as quickly as they could, once the guidance came down, and they did what they did, and they made adjustments as they went. But at the same time, I'm sure we probably could have gotten to a point where we were still operating and wearing masks much sooner had that directive been more clear.
We could have. I don't think anybody really considers pandemic or flood or massive civil unrest in their future planning.
Yes.
I mean, I don't.
Satiated. We don't see civil unrest in the forecast for the next 5 to 10 years. Somebody's trying to set someone at ease.
I mean, but yeah, where are you gonna make that plan, and then what are you gonna do to make that plan work? Yeah, I guess the assumption would be just that you would end up closing, and which some places have. My business, I've pivoted. I've been trying to pivot. I'm doing a lot of digital presentation work through my production brand. And that's all, I'm focused now on my YouTube channel, where I was never focused on it before. Because like in-person photography, in-person theater, it's not going to happen. I shouldn't say it's not going to happen. What's going to happen is people are going to do it, regardless of however many times people tell them it's a dumb idea. And then there's going to be outbreaks like there was at Walnut's theater camp.
Yeah.
And it's just going to keep this whole pandemic on a slow boil here in Philadelphia until there is a cure or an effective treatment. And that's the problem with American exceptionalism. We don't react to problems that people elsewhere in the globe have solved with really simple solutions because we think that can't work here. That's always the first response. That's always the first response. Oh, Australia had a lot of gun deaths, so they banned guns, period.
Yes.
And they had no more gun deaths. Well, that can't work here. Why? Their land mass is the same as ours. They don't have quite the number of population that we have, but I don't understand why a diverse and multicultural society, just because it's on the other side of the globe, literally why their solution for gun violence wouldn't work here.
Yeah.
And that's not to say I'm all for personal gun ownership. I'm just saying, you know, like that's just an example of a solution that we won't even consider because it didn't happen here. New Zealand, you know, it's a huge country. They stopped movement and they required masks. They were through this pandemic in 3 months.
Yeah. There was a conversation about, once upon a time, seatbelts were not a requirement,
Mm-hmm.
and we had very similar conversations about it. But now look at it.
I mean, I was alive then. I was a little kid, you know, like, yeah, seatbelts, car seats weren't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Booster seats definitely weren't a thing. Airbags weren't a thing. But, you know,
Yeah.
we learn, and unfortunately, some things have to be enforced as a societal change for people to catch on. I don't know why that is. I don't know why people, you know, I guess it's Darwinism at its finest, you know, people choosing not to survive, choosing not to respond to a real threat. I don't know.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think people are the people on the opposition are afraid of when it comes to wearing masks or Black Lives Matter? What do you think their fear is?
It's not a fear. It's not a rational fear. It's uh it's a fear of blackness. It's a fear of black excellence. Um it's a fear of, you know, as soon as mask wearing, and avoiding, um, as soon as mask wearing and the effect of the virus was shown to be greater in the minority community, in any minority community, no matter what the description of the minority community is, the virus was having a greater effect in those communities. And as soon as that happened was when the reopen arguments started, because it instantly politicized it on a racial basis.
Oh, it's versus them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
created an us versus them. And, you know, I'm all for. I will have a conversation with a black man, to the ends of the earth about whether or not they should be, uh, vaccinated. But I'm not willing to have that same conversation with white society in any respect, because, you know, there is a racial element and a historic element to questioning, medicine as a science,
Yes.
and it's valid, and it has reason, but my God, you know, you can't. There is so much different between, uh, World War II, between Tuskegee, between Puerto Rico and between now, that, makes these concerns not realistic anymore. But white society doesn't have any single reason to fear Western medicine.
Yeah. No. Yeah, you're right. And I was thinking about how, my doctor. I know that she's a good doctor because she recommends things to me that I just, you know. for a second I'll think like, is this extra, or is are they taking care of me, or did they have a meeting that said we really have to push this, you know, for whatever. But then I think about, but like, am I better for this? Am I better for getting this shot? Am I better for, you know, this guidance that was given by my doctor, and I trust her. Um, but not everybody is given that, especially when you tell them that you have a problem. You
Yeah,
know,
and it's ignored.
there's yes, there's too much evidence of Black and brown people being discredited the uh, for the medical concerns that they have brought up. So, you know, when I hear someone talking about like, I'm not getting my kid vaccinated, I'm like, okay, so your kid's gonna be the only one in school that's not vaccinated. All the other ones are gonna have it, and then your kid gets sick. You're gonna blame all of these other vaccinated kids
Right. Yeah.
on on your kid getting sick. You'll be the first one to say it's someone else's fault when you didn't take every possible precaution that was made available to you. And it drives me insane. It's like, it's not some far off cable news channel that's talking about this. It's the main news that's telling us. You know, so when it gets down there, it's like, so we have this news cycle that's all day. They tell us all day that we need to focus on. Uh, they tell us all day like there's breaking news, but when we get to the evening has consolidated that into everything we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or everything we should know, and it's consistent with everything that's been talked about all day. So to get down to whatever evening news you watch on, you know, on the most accessible television stations or media outlets, and then not believe it because, you know, so it's usually, well, some person sitting in you know, probably a home office, you know, or so, whatever their studio is, just shouting into a microphone, getting COVID all over their microphone, talking about, you know, just saying they disagree, and and most of the time they know this is a lie. They just know that this riles up people, and like, your numbers go up when you disagree with this with society, and then they walk out there with that little bit of information that they didn't even bother to check and see if it was valid. And so that's what drives me insane. It's like, okay, these five outlets over here are saying the exact same thing, and they are rushing to break it as quickly as possible, but they are not going to break it without confirming it. So I remember HBO had a series called The Newsroom. It was Aaron Sorkin, like, years ago, and I remember them like, basically every episode was about the story they were going to break towards the end. So they're compiling all this information to figure out if this is the one they're going to go with by the end of the night, by the I guess that was a 9 o'clock slot. And seeing that whole process was just like, yeah, they're holding on to this, but they want to make sure this is relevant, because if they put this out there and it's not true, it's going to be debunked, and they're not going to be a trusted source.
Right.
For news. So I just think it's crazy that ignorant people feel like they don't have to do the work. Here's what I want to believe in. So that's all I want.
Right. Yeah. No, that happens all the time, and it's very frustrating. It's very confusing. Why are, you know, what how do we support freedom of speech at the same time as we limit fake speech or false speech? speech that is just geared towards getting viewership, that's just self-aggrandizing, that's just geared towards supporting itself, basically, because it's a lot of what is out there. Yeah, I don't know I don't know how we do that. There used to be an accessibility problem. And the one of the blessings of the modern era is that it now costs practically nothing for you to produce something to a level that it can be consumed, and distributed to a level that it can be consumed by the vast majority of literally the world. So, even if you're a dirt farmer in Brazil, you can get your story out. And that's always been the goal of media, is to increase accessibility to the point where everyone can know everyone else's story, or at least the important ones. The problem is bad actors want to muddy those waters of accessibility, and call things fake that are real, and also provide that fake content so that they have the platform to say, no, everything's fake. Everything's fake on Twitter. Not everything's fake on Twitter. In fact, it's a really good news source, but you have to be very careful about who you listen to and what you're listening to.
Yeah, and almost on social media specifically, and on Twitter, like, it is much easier to get fact checked.
Yeah.
when that information comes out, there's you'll go down, maybe the first few are agreeing or commenting, but somebody will say, let me direct your attention to this article here that contradicts what you just said. So it's like, it's almost like we just forgot that we could have a back and forth to maybe get an understanding. And I don't really understand why you would be so aggressive about holding on to falsehoods. It's like, if I'm having a conversation with you and I say something that I was confident was right up until my conversation with you, and then you respond to that with more information. I now have information I didn't have before. So if I process that information, I'm definitely going to change my view because I have new information. I didn't have that information before. So we can go back and forth, but it's basically me questioning whether what I heard was correct, but getting the validation from this new information that some of this was correct, but not all of it was. But now all of that becomes my information, my knowledge. So now I can move forward with more information. And I think people have a hard time understanding that is to their benefit instead of a negative. Like, they don't want to admit that the feelings they had 5 years ago are not valid today. And so many times I'll have a conversation where I say, I'm not saying that 5 years ago this wasn't the way to go. I'm saying that now that you have this new information, it's really hard to see how you operated before as the way. Or the position that you held before to continue to hold. And I don't know why it's so hard for people to admit that. Maybe it's some part of education they ignored or didn't want to acknowledge. Because most of the time when I'm on social media and somebody is jumping in with their whataboutism, I'll end up saying, what do you expect to gain from this? Like, do you expect the person who originally made this statement to remove the statement, and then what? You know, like what is the point of that? Especially if someone is telling you, this is my opinion, or this, based on this information, they're telling you where they got it from, but you're sitting and you're jumping all over them saying like, this is what about this? What about that? You're not even saying whether it's right or wrong. You're just trying to deflect. And it's like, if you wanted to start a conversation, you have your own feed. You could have
Mhm.
had you could have you could have said whatever you wanted on your feed and just completely ignored this one. I don't agree with that, so I'm going to write something else. But instead, they'll get in there and they want to fight. They want to fight this person here, and instead of saying like, where did you get this information from? Because it was my understanding that this was the thing, and then you could probably get on the same page together where you're like, you know what, I thought that as well, but then I read this, and then I read that, and then I went to a meeting, uh, where this was brought up again, and my whole world opened, and so I had some of the information. I didn't have all of it, and I'm continue my position on this is continuing to evolve. Um, and then I think it's also funny that society will criticize politicians for evolving, but that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get new information and evolve. So maybe we shouldn't be so hard on somebody's position 20 or 30 years ago if they are actively growing from that position today. So I think about that. We took a long pause in May where we were talking about Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter, uh, uh, you know, brought to the forefront this greater conversation that we had been having about uh, racial inequality. And as it pertains to us, particularly in our community, uh, arts and culture and theater, we start to talk about leadership. And we have already been talking for the past few seasons a little bit more vocally about the community being so white, and now we're looking at the leadership and saying like the reason this doesn't change is because the leadership has a position that they are unwilling to change. That they are unwilling to change, and so I read the article that was up in American Theater today. Was it today or the other day? But I read it today.
Something.
The the one about
Playpen.
the one about Playpen, and one of the comments in there was saying that these leaders have been in place for the last 20 years, and they are maintaining some sort of status quo because they are the leaders. And if these leaders don't change, the mindset can't change either. And a successful arts organization is supposed to be one that can exist without its leader. Otherwise you are stuck in founder syndrome, and it's really hard to see this organization grow beyond what its initial mission or founding ideals were.
Well, like you brought up initially, I don't know that it's that this leadership of, you know, I don't even know how to describe the group of mid to large size theaters that we're talking about.
Mhm.
They're not the only theater in Philadelphia. In fact, I was interviewed for one
Yes.
of these articles, and the writer has been writing about Philadelphia theater for 20 years. And he said to me, "Are there black theaters?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Come on, man. There's literally a theater of, led by black people that matches the description of every theater company that we're talking about. You could literally just replace them one for one,
Mhm.
And yes, there's a lot of black theater in Philadelphia.
There might be one or two.
Yeah. So he's like, well, I know Theater in the X, and I know I forget what other one he highlighted. I'm like, there's so many more, and you can interview a lot better people than me to talk about them because I'm not the best historian of Philadelphia theater, but
Yeah.
there are dozens, if not, like hundreds with all the single member orgs and the sole proprietorships. There are black people out here trying to, maintain a culture, and create a culture of performing arts here in Philadelphia that caters to the community of Philadelphia, not suburban folks who want to bring their money into the city. While they want to cater to the youth and adults of Philadelphia, they're not going to turn down money from people who live in the suburbs. They're not going to not sell tickets to people who live in the suburbs. And if you want to see real theater, go to one of them.
Yeah.
Go to Theater in the X, in the park, and enjoy the performance because it's always great. And then donate to them, give them $300 for their season. I don't care if you're from Paoli.
Yes. Do you remember? So I forget the official number, but I remembered. Talking to our Eric Thomas, playwright, not quite local, but we claim him as Philadelphian. I remember talking to him one day after the Theater Alliance of Greater Philadelphia had folded, and I said, do you remember there used to be like a lot of theater companies? Like we used to have a lot of theater companies, but now if you were to look at Theater Philadelphia's list, you barely see 50 theater companies. And I'm like, what happened to all of those companies that used to make up this collective of a theater community? And, some of them, went dormant, but didn't necessarily disappear. Some people moved and took their company with them. But in general, it was like at some point we just sort of stopped recognizing the fact that we had so many different theaters, maybe because the focus may have just been on the ones that were like Barrymore eligible. And maybe that's the only conversations that are being had. We're only talking about the people who can not necessarily compete, but who are eligible for awards. And we're just sort of ignoring the rest of the companies that are still trying to come up. Because I looked at.
I think that came up as a topic. What was that? 5 years ago, there was the symposium where all the black theater makers and all the white theater makers got together at a place up in North Philly, and there was a big, like, people were arrested and
big kerfuffle about the security, and it was a town hall of some sort. It was a Freedom Theater, and some people that were part of the community were not able to come in because they may have been late, and security gave them a hard time, and it ended up being a bigger thing. And it was like, aren't you trying to welcome in the community, and now you're restricting the community? It was big and it was ugly.
Yeah,
it was very ugly.
That combined with that year was the year, that year and the following year, Barrymore's So White was a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee
And I
Goldenberg,
was having a
sorry.
conversation. Oh, just recently.
Yeah, Lee
The
Goldenberg.
last one.
When
Yes.
Lee Goldenberg took over was right after Barrymore is So White, and
Yeah.
she did quite a lot to like change that
Hmm.
systemically. Now James Harrow is doing it. I haven't seen as much of his work, but um, yeah, I mean, like I think that before Lee, like the Barrymore organization and the Theater Philadelphia organization kind of alienated the Black Theater Philadelphia community so much that that I mean, I remember literal statements of people saying, "No, we're not going to participate. We're just not going to participate anymore. We're not going to. We're done calling out racism. We're done having these town halls. We're done trying to fix it. You know,
Hmm.
it's just not going to go anywhere." And you know, that's a shame because you can't fix a system that you're not participating in. Um,
True.
but also it makes sense because why participate in a system that is out to get you? You get frustrated like me.
Yeah. I mean, it was the. We got a lot of mileage on this one episode. This season 2, episode 8 of Broad Street Review podcast. My interview with Ozzie Jones, Brian Anthony Wilson, and Terrell Green,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the Oscar, that was the Barrymore So White, and we had that conversation at the end. We sort of walked away saying, you know, we need to fill the voids. We need to fill those. We need to fill in those gaps with the art we want to see, and we need to identify that art and support that art and elevate that art. Um, and it's more. I mean, to me, it's more important to do that than to, criticize the existing companies and force them to change. Like, I feel like, you know there was a product that was a hit for 15-20 years, and then something new came along and people stopped buying that product. So it's that company has to decide if they want to grow along with society or continue to do the same thing. But they won't do that unless it hits them in their pocket.
But they're
You
not
know,
going to do it anyway because it turns into the Suzanne Roberts. It turns into, it turns into, we've been popular for 15, 20 years because we were doing a little bit of diversity work.
yeah.
And then we got recognized, and then we got money, and then we didn't do more diversity work. We just did the same amount or started doing less. And
Mm,
then we still got money. So then we started becoming insular and saying, well, our audiences want this.
yes.
And that's what every theater company, every, white theater company seems to do. They seem to declare what their audiences want as if audiences know what they want before seeing a
Hmm.
show.
Yeah. Does
Um,
your audience serve on your board? Did
yeah,
your audience write your mission statement? I was like, because the last time I checked, you were the leader of this organization. So can't you lead this organization in a different direction? If you were to hire, let's just say today you decide you want to quit, that you don't want to do this anymore. You hire somebody else, and they don't come in and pick up where you left off. They come in, with fresh ideas, or they can identify what you've done so well. Maybe they want to hold on to those or pay homage to them, but they're coming in with sort of new ideas. And so if you're not constantly thinking about, every season is a reinvention. So I don't understand why the companies are thinking about maintaining some sort of status quo. Yeah. I guess when you become a larger company, your season doesn't really have a theme. It just has a bunch of shows. that you've been fighting so hard to get the rights for. Like if you're something like Walnut, like maybe you've been working really hard to get the rights to, something that's out of reach for many companies, and now you finally get it, and you get it, but the conversation in society is not really supportive of what you finally got the rights to get.
I mean, come
But
on, Shrek.
stay the course anyway. I know. Um, you know.
Well, Walnut's not Walnut doesn't fight for things that are hard to get the rights to. Walnut fights for getting the rights to, and producing things that they think are going to draw an audience, and that's what every theater company eventually becomes after they hit this. Every company starts as the underdog.
Mhm.
They scrap and fight for recognition. They try and do new things, creative things, inventive things until those adjectives get applied to their name, and
Yes.
then they lock it in. And then after they lock it in for a while, they start losing money because people don't care anymore. And then once
Yeah.
they start losing money, they start looking for the things that are big names outside of them so that they can pull those audience numbers that they now need to
Mhm.
support their building and their
Yes.
staff
Yes.
and their salaries.
Do you think the infrastructure holds back these organizations? Because I think about that sometimes too, and I think yes, you are trying to manage a building, and that's why you can't take a risk on this local artist who's getting a lot of buzz, because you don't think that's going to fare in the region. Uh, if you didn't have, well, I wonder if you didn't have those expenses, would you go back to taking risks? And are they risks? I mean,
I guess.
I
I mean,
mean, are
uh,
they risks or are they just ideas?
no, they're not risks. That's one thing we need to get rid of that language in theater because you're
Yes.
you're not taking a risk. You're not even being inventive, quote unquote, or edgy or whatever. You're producing in a medium something that you hope audiences will enjoy.
Yeah.
And this medium has been around forever. It is such an integral part of our society that things as varied as our legal system are based on it. And you're taking something that we as humans do, and you're trying to engage a segment of society. So, what? It's the commercialization of the art that's the problem. It's the commercialization and commodification. I don't think a building has anything to do with it. I mean, I guess we can wait and see what happens with Painted Bride. You know,
Yeah. Oh, that's still up in the air, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, we can see what happens with their company now that they don't have a building. Do they start taking risks again? Are they right? Are they right that the building was dragging them down?
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I don't think so, but also I'm in search of a building, so I'm biased in this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm in search of
I
a
fe-
building right now.
I feel like I would really love I would really love the people with access to funds to think about, instead of building a grand theater, build theaters, like plural. Because most of us can engage, under 100 people in a sitting, and if you had a space that could seat 110, comfortably, I think a lot of theaters could grow into that, you know, and extend their run if 100 seats is not enough. Like, I don't need, when I thought about it starting off, I said, I want to grow out of the Shubin. I want to grow out of Studio 5. And until I grow out of them, I'm going to work within these within the box that is this black box, you know. Um, and so, but I think that there could be so many more of those that are not just useful for theater. They could be used for any kind of, you know, gathering, um, bands and podcasts and seminars and workshops, and there's a whole lot of things we can do if we had more smaller venues. So I've always thought about that, especially when the lottery is huge, and
Well,
if you're in a lottery pool, you think about it.
look at so international example would be like Sydney Opera House. Sydney Opera
Hmm.
House has, and unless you visited, you probably don't know, but some people in the industry might know. But Sydney Opera House has like 10 theaters. It's not just
Mm,
the big opera house. Like the big opera
yeah.
house seats like 3,000 people or something like that. But underneath Sydney Opera House, there's like 10 theaters. There's two 500-person seat theaters, and there's like eight really small black boxes. And they've even turned their shop space into a black box when they needed it for a festival.
Oh
So
wow.
they, and all of that space is provided for free or really reduced charge, not what it actually costs them to keep up the space.
Yeah.
Because the government of Australia actually funds the arts.
Yes.
But you
It
could
supports them.
you could do the same thing with like the Kimmel, although it's not set up for that right now. But like, the Kimmel has this huge, beautiful production space up top, and then underneath it's got all these rooms that could be used for
Hmm.
black boxes and could be provided to theater companies or producers for practically nothing.
Yeah.
Why isn't it? Why don't we follow that model? Why is Walnut Studio 5 closed? Why isn't anything being produced there? Um, why is it so difficult? Why can't I get into the old Prince anymore? Why can't I get into the studio room at the black box at the
And
Prince?
yeah.
Why did all these rooms disappear all of a sudden? All of a sudden, we have none of these rooms.
Why
Um,
did you make space for a black box at the Suzanne Roberts Theater and not see it through?
right, right.
Because maybe, you know, when they were on hard times, that smaller space would have been more beneficial
Yeah.
uh, to produce in, and you could rent out the larger space to someone else.
I'll tell
Yeah,
you
there's.
I'll tell you an example. I don't think I can piss anybody off with this one. So do you remember the Red Room at Society Hill Playhouse?
Yes.
So Society Hill Playhouse, was run, and like the whole Playhouse was run very authoritarianish
Hmm.
by the owner, and no, she's a great woman, and you know, much respect to her. She survived as a theater for far longer than most people could be expected to. She wanted to do it. She did a few shows every year. She produced a few shows every year, and one of the shows she wanted to produce was this awful musical called "Divorce Till Divorce Do Us Part," and it's the worst script. It's horrible. It's horrible in every way imaginable. It's
Well,
just
I mean, look at the hits that came out of there. It was like nonsense and stuff like that. Like really did well in there.
sure. Anyway, so she wanted to produce this,
Yeah.
and her first thought was to produce it in the big room upstairs,
Hmm.
that seats like 200, and the red room only seats like 50, or used to seat like 50 or 60, depending on layout. And so I was TD for her. We set it up upstairs. We, built a set. We got lighting. We did everything upstairs, and she couldn't sell it. She couldn't get people to buy tickets. She had houses of 20 and 30, and she's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna have to cancel the run after the first weekend." I said, "Don't cancel the run. This is just the wrong space for this production. Put it downstairs in the red room where people are sitting on top of the actors because they're telling these intimate stories."
Yes.
And it's kind of a drinking body, thing that, for lack of a better term, is supposed to be this gripe session between the audience and the actors. So put them all in a small space. And she did, and she ran it for 3 weeks, and it was sold out every show. There's something to be said for these small spaces.
Yeah, especially you can, like I said, I want to grow out of that space. So maybe I got to build an audience. And a smaller company who doesn't really have an audience isn't taking a risk. They're just producing theater. They've got these productions that they've mounted, and the lead artist wanted to produce this show and then pulled in a bunch of people to come together to bring this to the stage. Then the audience comes and sees it, and then they form an opinion then. Right. But I think sometimes it's hard when you're looking at, I guess when you get to a certain level, you can't think about like, I'm going to bring in some new artists that no one knows because I got to fill this space. So I have to bring in a seasoned piece and then hope to still fill this space.
It just seems like such an excuse. It seems like that's always it's the same instant drop to it's the same argument against violent protest, quote unquote violent protest. I don't like this, therefore it's not going to be successful. Or you got to think of the long term. You've got to think of the big game. No, it's not a risk. It's not violence. It's not doing something that you're not doing. Just because it's not the way that you do it doesn't mean that it doesn't work.
Do you remember when Plays and Players Theater, I don't know if it was a whole season, it may have started in the Fringe, but there were quite a few productions that happened directly on stage. Like the stage there were risers built on the stage so that they could have more intimate productions, but using the facilities of the stage itself. And I remember those. I remember really enjoying quite a few productions from that view. Like, wow, this is great. We're on stage and there's all this good lighting, and it's still intimate because we're not going to fill this theater, but we are going to take advantage of this. And I feel like a lot of these larger companies that have that could do that too, if they don't already have a smaller venue to do to work with. But once you are thinking about like, we need thousands upon thousands of people to come and be engaged by this work, that's when it gets to a point where it can't even, like, the mindset is this can't fail. Like this can't just be mediocre. It's got to be stellar because it has to fill this theater.
But at the same time, audience ticket sales are not what floats any theater.
I know, because they all say ticket sales only count for half of our operating costs.
Less, in most cases.
Even less, yeah. So you're right. They almost have to be reminded of that. Ticket sales do not actually pay your bills anyway. So why are you so concerned about how many people actually show up in here? And if you already know that ticket sales only cover half or whatever the percentage is, what is the overhead that requires such large grants and so many donors to sustain? If if you can't, I mean, if you have all of these people here and you claim that you need all of those people just to engage a community on anything you bring to your stage, then everything should be a success. Like even the most intimate piece should be a success because of the infrastructure you are trying really hard to sustain.
Yeah, I mean, and then also think about it from the even larger perspective. Think about all the quote unquote unplugged sessions that major bands have done, you know, where they bring a guitar and a singer to a small room. You know, if that wasn't profitable, if there wasn't a way to make that work, it wouldn't have happened. You know, there are people being uber successful with things that are less overhead and
more intimate.
Right. So
I know we're not going to solve the problems.
No, we're not going to solve the problems. I'm trying. You know, that's why people keep saying like they see my name everywhere, and it's because I'm still trying. I'm still trying to solve the problems. I'm still trying to bring attention to the problems.
Given what we have experienced over the last 4 or 5 months, and you know, as we pull in the conversations that we've been having over the years with various friends and colleagues, what would you like to see in our community moving forward? What, if you could name a couple of things, what kind of changes would you like?
Really cool if your organization can't see a way to execute diversity in its leadership and artistic teams, its production team, etc. If you are a managing artistic director at an organization, let's say, and your office staff is white and your production staff is white, and you want to produce more diverse work, you want to get eyes on more diverse theater, literally do a takeover. Like people have been doing Twitter takeovers for years.
Yes.
Let a black company come in. You have zero oversight over them. All you do is provide the building and the money that they need to produce whatever piece that they want. You give them a budget. It's the same budget as one of your pieces, and that's it. You give them a check. You give them a building. You give them whatever resources they ask for, but you don't have any influence over what they produce, how they produce it, how they choose to tell the story, anything like that. You know, and it would be an organization that has their own artistic director. Don't do it as a co-production. Don't do it do a full takeover. Let a company come in for literally half your season and be like, we're taking over this space. These are our stories that we want to tell. We'll bring our audience, you know, because you have a nice, comfortable theater. I think that would be cool moving forward. I think it would be cool moving forward to, since we're in this space where we can't have face-to-face interaction, where where everything's going digital. I'm advocating for a Black, Indigenous, people of color led digital production house to be stood up by Philadelphia theater companies. So the idea behind this is like a bunch of theater companies got together a few years ago and stood up a scene shop. They all contributed a certain amount of money so that the scene shop could have a building and have equipment. And they hired a couple of technical directors, and they paid for staffing, and in return they got inexpensive set builds for them. And then other people could also contact that scene shop to have sets built for them, but they would pay more. So I'm thinking the same thing with digital. There's no one clearinghouse for digital productions by Philadelphia theater companies, and I'm amongst a few people who know how to set that sort of system up. So let's set it up. Let's set up a rack in somebody's building somebody would need to donate the electricity, the space for the rack, and the air conditioning, and the internet. And then have a few companies donate, $5,000-$10,000 towards the equipment in that rack and the equipment that needs to be sent out to actors so that they can capture their video and audio well. And let's those companies that donate get 3 free productions per year that they can transmit on that system. And they're live productions. So, people have to log in, they pay a ticket price, they can see it live and make it accessible. You can have free accounts for people who have a certain income level or whatever. We can increase accessibility. We can get equipment that we could go and set it up in a park or something, so that people could attend for free. Yeah, so that's my idea, one of my ideas. And then the leadership of that production clearinghouse should be Black, Indigenous, people of color, people of other minority description, and the decision-making team for that as well. I don't know. There's some things going on with City Council that are interesting. There's a renewed focus on hiring, A, from within the city, and B, preferring certified minority-owned businesses to fulfill city contracts. So I'm working on that myself. It's, something that minority-owned businesses should consider. The city spends a lot of money every year. If you live and work in Philadelphia and you do literally anything that can service a business, then you should consider it. And because the reason I'm doing it in the production space is because I know who these production contracts go out to that the city pays for. Like, all the AV systems that they set up for the Pope, I know I worked with and worked for the company that set up all those systems. I know who they are, I know where they're based, and A, I know they're racist, and B, I know they're taking money out of the city. And I know how much they're overcharging the city because they can.
They're going to come after you for that.
I'm doubting they'll ever even see this broadcast.
Somebody's trying to Skype into you right now.
Yeah. I'm doubting they'll ever see this broadcast, but if they do, I know who you are.
Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Contribute to find out how. Connect with us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at Broad Street Review. Thank you for helping to keep the conversation going.